First deal that you bought, how did you find it? I guess I'm just curious, right?
I ended up buying a quadplex in LaPorte, Indiana.
Ben, dude, tell us about your first deal, man. So you're waiting tables. I guess number one, let's even go back further than that. You're waiting tables. When did you come up with the idea, or the idea crossed your path to go, hey, this real estate thing might be interesting?
Sure. So my first business idea, I wanted to launch a DJ company because it's something that I did in the past. So I figured, why not take the same skills that I used to play in nightclubs and dance parties and kind of pivot into more of like the wedding, private event, corporate function industry. I started building that, really working, striving towards that goal. And I read a simple book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And the principle, begin with the end in mind, changed the entire trajectory of my life, right? I just thought, do I really want to be up there, a 50-year-old DJ hyping the crowd up? It might be cool in the time, but what do I do at that next step? Shortly thereafter, I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. A lot of real estate investors, that was a turning point for them as well.
Yep.
But man, that just opened up my eyes. And from that moment forward, after I finished that book, I knew that in some shape or some fashion, that real estate would be the vehicle. So I just started studying from there, man. Started diving in, trying to learn what I was doing. I bought my first investment property out of state with cash. This is all money that I worked my tail off waiting tables. Tons of risk in it. It was a big learning lesson. I could have lost my tail. Luckily, I made like a small profit 8 months later. But in that process, man, I learned that there was more strategic ways to have less exposure. And that's where I stumbled into wholesaling.
Dude, so that first deal that you bought, how did you find it? I guess I'm just curious, right? How did you find it? Did you end up, so you said you sold it 8 months later. Yep. What did you do? So you bought it. Did you flip it? Like, what'd you do?
Yeah. So I was introduced to an older gentleman. He's known as the foreclosure king, he's probably almost 70 years old now. Been in the industry for a super long time. They deal with more like REOs, foreclosures, have a lot of relationships with the big banks. So they would get, these massive portfolios liquidated and come up with all these, bargain house properties. And I ended up buying a quadplex in LaPorte, Indiana, small little town in northern Indiana. And it seemed like a smoking deal. And it kind of was. I bought it. We had it under contract like the first week. I just listed it with an agent as is. And we had a contract on it. After that phase drew out, the buyer withdrew because it needed a lot of work. So we listed it back on the market. It might have been more like 6 months. It felt like forever, right? But we finally got an offer on it. And after I paid out, the real estate commissions and everything else, I profited probably $4,000 to $5,000. But in that same scope, in that same time period, I started attending the local RIAs, got plugged in with some different investors, and everyone was wholesaling. I'm like, what is wholesaling? And that's just where all the homework, the research started.
Dude, so that's fascinating, because what happened with a lot of people is would have that first experience, with that deal that didn't go quite as well as you wanted. It was out of state and there's some complications, and they'd pull back and go, well, maybe this isn't for me. They'd go, if this is the model, I don't want to keep doing it. But there's a really big lesson there is anyone who's listening to this, if you've tried a strategy in your business, whether it's a marketing strategy or whether it's a real estate strategy, and it hasn't worked the way that you wanted to the first time, you know what, guys, the funny thing is, oftentimes it doesn't. That's why you experiment. That's why you try new things. I think the big thing is just make sure you're not taking risks that are like betting the bank risks on the first handful of stuff. Because then if you do end up losing your shirt on that one, you probably wouldn't have the confidence or any money in the bank to go try to do the next thing. So you're showing up to the RIAs. How'd you get the first deal done, man? How'd you do the first wholesale?